back in the 80s, as a child, I used to watch a show called The Adventures of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. The show is currently one of the longest running cartoon shows in history and is famous for teaching young children life lessons. I loved the show and watched it every day. However, by the age of 13, I stopped watching the show. I'm now grown up and live in an apartment in New York. One day, when I was browsing around the internet, I found a site that was selling episodes of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. I scrolled through and saw that they had the whole collection. Naturally, like most people my age, I bought the collection to relive my childhood. I received an entire DVD collection in the mail of all the seasons. Oddly enough, though, there was one that I received that was on a VHS. I did some research on the internet, and what I got was a few posts discussing an episode of Fat Albert that aired for only a few minutes. According to the fans, the episode was just beginning to start up, but then right as the theme began to play, the show cut to static, and an announcement was made on CBS, the channel that Fat Albert originally aired on, that tonight's episode of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was cancelled, and another episode will play instead. Upon realization of this, I became excited, not only because I now have the complete collection of my favorite shows that I loved as a kid, but I also have some rare unreleased episode. I decided to play the episode titled Smiling first. I got out my old VHS player and plugged it into the TV and put the VHS in. I was greeted by a black screen which just said in bold red letters, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, smiling. From there it then cut to a picture of a mouth smiling, with odd Japanese text above it. There was a rip in the screen that covered the last three symbols. Thankfully, I texted my friend who spoke Japanese, and he was able to tell me, using the parts of the symbols that weren't cut off, what they were, and translate it for me. He said it translated out to, smiling is the mask of the suffering. It was an odd way to begin, and it unnerved me for some odd reason. Now, before I mention the theme, I need to mention that a lot of the intro was cut out, and only the scenes I mention are in it. The main theme began to play, except something was wrong. The song was lower and slowed down, making it sound depressing and ominous. Even weirder in the scenes where Bill Cosby was supposed to be on the stage dancing around during the theme. He wasn't there. It was just an empty background. It then cut to the scene where Albert's friends are supposed to be carrying him, but instead it was just a picture of Albert lying on the ground, and footprints leading off screen in the direction that they were carrying Albert. But what really stood out was that there were scratch marks leading in the opposite direction of the footprints. From what I could gather, I believe that the boys saw something and ran away. However, one of the boys wasn't able to get away fast enough, and it grabbed him and dragged him away. The intro then cut to the junkyard, and it was abandoned and empty. It showed the instruments the Cosby Kids used for music. The instruments were lying on the ground, mangled and broken. I could have sworn that on the end of one of the instruments I saw a bit of blood, as if someone had used it as a weapon and hit someone. The intro finally ended, and I was quite shocked at some of the imagery I saw, but I had to continue watching the episode. The episode shows the Cosby Kids and Albert playing in the junkyard. Rudy began talking about how he heard about a new girl moving into a home nearby them. Rudy went on to say,
I've heard from kids who've spoken to her tell me that she's really weird. We shouldn't hang out with her.
Albert then replied,
Just because she's different doesn't mean we shouldn't hang out with her.
Before Albert and Rudy could finish their conversation, the school bell rang. Albert and the gang then hurried to school. When they arrived, they ran into the new girl. The gang introduced themselves and said hello. The new girl replied in a sad, depressed tone. Hello. I'm Daisy. Albert then asked her if she wanted to walk to class with them. Daisy then said, okay, I guess so. As they walked, Albert asked what had her so down, and Daisy replied, I just feel sad. I've never had many friends. I've always been secluded, and everything just has a meaningless feel to it. Albert then replied, saying,
But it's not, Daisy. Everything you do has meaning, and life is what you make of it, and when you finally realize that, you'll smile and be glad I told you.
Daisy then said, okay then. After school, Daisy and Albert were walking when they eventually encountered Rudy lighting a joint with his special lighter that he carries around. Albert becomes furious and warns Rudy that drugs can do things to him and make him go insane. However, Rudy brushes off what Albert said and continued. The next day, Rudy got into trouble after having an outburst and attacking a fellow classmate and beating him into near unconsciousness. Events like this continued over the course of 3 days, until Albert couldn't take it anymore. He decided he would tell the school faculty that he was doing drugs, and to see if he could get Rudy any help. However, school was already over, and Albert decided that he would wait till tomorrow to tell the school faculty. However, as Albert was walking to school, a scream bellowed from Rudy's house. Albert rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. Albert quickly went home and called the police. After a few minutes, Officer Gomez and other policemen arrived at the house. They went inside only to find Rudy's parents sitting at the dinner table, dead, with their heads lying against the table, and Rudy nowhere to be found. The police did an investigation of the bodies and concluded that they were poisoned. Eventually, Daisy arrived and was in terror when she saw the sight. The police began to look around the house, and Albert and Daisy decided to help and found a ventilation shaft, ripped open, and assumed whoever kidnapped Rudy escaped through the ventilation shaft with him. Around 10 p.m., 2 days after Rudy's disappearance, Albert sees outside the window in the dark. Rudy standing in a dark corner, staring at him. Albert ran out to see him, but Rudy ran off. The following day, Daisy was nowhere to be found, and after 3 days of absence, the police put out a search. Some neighbors state that they witnessed what looked like a kidnapping the night of Daisy's disappearance. The witnesses claim they saw what looked like Rudy, with a sadistic smile on his face, carrying something in a large sack away from Daisy's home. Albert then thought to himself,
It's those drugs. They're messing with Rudy's mind and making him do all these terrible things. He wasn't kidnapped. He killed his parents and climbed out the ventilation shaft.
The show then cut to live-action Bill Cosby murmuring to himself, It will not get my smile. It will not get my smile. It will not get my smile. Bill eventually became more aggressive and began yelling and pacing around the room like a madman. It then cuts back to the cartoon and shows Officer Gomez driving a car. His tires eventually burst from rolling across glass shards from what looked like a smashed bottle. Officer Gomez's car crashed into a wall. The front end of where he crawled out reveals that he had a twisted leg, and he was immobile. Rudy then appears out of a nearby alley and starts beating Officer Gomez until he's unconscious, and then drags his body off into the alley. Live-action Bill Cosby then appeared on the screen and was beating himself to near death with a baseball bat, repeating, "It will not have my smile," over and over and over. His face was swollen, and he was losing insane amounts of blood. One of the stagehands eventually came out to help him, but he struck him down with the baseball bat, and then Bill Cosby continued to beat himself with the baseball bat until he was dead. It then cut back to the cartoon and showed Albert sitting and reading the newspaper. He sees in the newspaper that Officer Gomez disappeared last night, and his patrol car was found 2 blocks down from where Albert lived. Albert decided to go out and investigate. He went to the spot where Officer Gomez's car was found. He walked around the area for an entire hour searching for clues. Albert eventually found what he was looking for. It barely caught his eye, but he saw in a nearby alley, glistening in a very thin stretch of light that just barely reached the alley, what looked like a few drops of blood. He went over to the alley and found several drops of blood leading further into the alley. What Albert found at the end of the alley was shocking. It was a severed hand. The hand had several small puncture wounds in it, as if a syringe had been stuck into it, and the blood had been drained from it, almost as if a vampire had bit it several times. Albert then tried to open the door that was right behind the severed hand, but it was blocked off by some object. Albert then called the police. The police arrived and took the hand as evidence, and did an investigation of the alley. They found nothing else but the drops of blood in the hand. The hand was eventually confirmed to be Officer Gomez's hand. Albert was still in shock from that day, and he suspected that Rudy was behind it all. Albert got the remaining gang together, and decided that they would look for Rudy to confront him. They searched and searched, but found nothing. However, after a few hours of searching, Russell got bored, and wandered off. The rest of the gang noticed this, and went looking for him. They eventually found Russell, standing in an alley staring at Rudy. Rudy then grabbed Russell and ran off with him, and had a huge grin on his face. They followed Rudy without him noticing, and Rudy led them to a warehouse. Albert decided that the gang should stay out here and wait. The rest of the gang thought he was crazy, but Albert wanted to see if he could talk some sense into Rudy. Albert entered the warehouse, and saw Rudy standing across from Rudy facing in the opposite direction. Standing in the middle of the length between Albert and Rudy was Russell, just standing there. Albert then yelled,
Russell, get over here before Rudy hurts you.
Rudy then turned around and pointed a desk lamp towards Russell. The light revealed that it was simply a dummy. Albert had been fooled. Albert then yelled,
Rudy, don't you see what you're doing? You're hurting people. You need to turn yourself in.
Rudy did not respond, but instead turned around. His eyes were darkened holes, and he had just a big smile on his face. Rudy then stood aside to reveal a body right behind him. The body was hanging upside down from the ceiling, and its face was skinned, showing only an underlayer of muscle and tissue. The body was also wearing Rudy's clothes. This confused Albert because the Rudy that had done all these things was also wearing the same clothes. However, he didn't have to wait too long before the answer was revealed. Dark-eyed Rudy grabbed his face and pulled it off like a mask, revealing that it was Daisy behind all of it. Albert stood dumbfounded and in terror at what he saw. Suddenly it all made sense. It wasn't Rudy that was doing this. It was Daisy running around with similar clothes and wearing his face like a mask. Albert then said,
Why are you doing this, Daisy?
Daisy then replied, Because, Albert, I could never smile. But now I can, through the faces of other people. Albert then replied,
But what about Officer Gomez's hand in the alley? It looked like it had several puncture wounds.
Daisy then said, Why don't I show you? She shined the desk lamp light on another hanging body. This one was wearing a police officer uniform and was also skinned. It was no doubt that was Officer Gomez's body, Not only because it had a police officer outfit on, but because it was missing a hand. She pulled down his police shirt, revealing his stomach, and it revealed that his entire body was covered in puncture wounds from what looked like needles. Daisy then said, "I eventually began to feel sad again, and even though I was wearing a smile, I decided that I would drain the blood and stomach acid from the people I collected. What I do with the blood and stomach acid is I take it to a friend I know, and he makes it into a smokable drug. The drug makes me feel happy, but I'm still not able to smile from it. So if I wear the smile and use the drugs to make me feel happy, I will have a smile. If I keep both on, then." Albert replied sharply,
But why did you cut off Officer Gomez's hand in the first place?
Daisy then replied in a maniacal manner,
"He tried to grab me by my throat with his hand, so I cut it off. I didn't want to waste the blood in his hand, so I took a syringe and a jar I had, and I drained the blood from his hand into the jar."
Daisy then laughed and said,
"However, that's not important. What is the fact that you're the happiest person I know, and thus I need your smile."
Daisy then pulled out a large knife covered in blood. The blood glistened in the light from the moon, showing the crack off the ceiling. The sight made Albert sick. Albert ran from the door, but Daisy got to it before him, locked it, and swallowed the key. Albert then said,
No, you won't have my smile. You'll never take anyone else's smile ever again.
Albert then ran for some old gasoline cans which he spotted, and picked one of them up and poured it on Daisy. It got into her eyes, and she screamed, and began rubbing her eyes. Daisy eventually rubbed it off her eyes and was able to see again. She then charged with her knife ready to skin him. Albert then remembered the lighter that Rudy always carried around, which he last used for smoking the drugs that his friend gave him. Albert ran for Rudy's body and reached into his pocket and was relieved to see his lighter in there. Albert then turned around and lit the lighter. Daisy stopped and looked at Albert, and before she could run away, Albert said,
Hey, it's time to play.
Albert tossed the lighter at Daisy and she was ignited. She ran around the room screaming as she burned. She eventually fell into the other gasoline cans, causing a large explosion of fire. The fire grew and began to engulf the building. Eventually, it covered almost the entire warehouse, and the boys saw the light from the fire inside, and the smoke coming from the door. They tried to get it open by kicking and ramming it, but nothing worked, and eventually the place burned down with Albert in it. The police and fire department arrived and found Albert half dead and buried in large amounts of rubble. They managed to pull him out and put him on a stretcher and rolled him off into an ambulance. Albert then looked up and saw a charred body holding the knife that Daisy tried to use to kill him. He assumed that was Daisy. He also saw that Russell was back with the rest of the gang. Albert then put his head back down and rested, knowing that they had found Russell and ended Daisy. They then loaded Albert into the ambulance, and it drove off. The episode then ended, and cut to a static shot of Daisy wearing Rudy's face. This went on for a whole minute, and I felt as if Daisy was staring at me through the screen. The episode then cut to black. I didn't know what to think. I was feeling so many things at the moment. Fear from what I just saw. Anger at the person who sent this to me, thinking it would be a funny joke. And relief that Albert had made it out alive. Despite all these feelings, I knew one thing for sure. I had to destroy this VHS. I took it and smashed it into bits with a hammer, along with the entire complete DVD collection. Then I burned them just for safe measure. Is this the only copy? I'm not sure. But take this as a warning to whoever is reading this. If you receive a VHS copy, of a Fat Albert episode titled Fat Albert smiling, then immediately destroy it. And that was Smiling, written by Tnade711. Review time. That was a frustrating, tropey mess. What was that? Okay. I really wanted to stop reading that. That was very long-winded. And it made my head hurt every minute of the way. But I might as well get this review over with. Review time. Yeah, that was bad. And for a number of reasons. First off, the introduction is entirely cliched. The guy finds the entire series online, and it coincidentally came with the VHS tape for a lost episode, a long lost episode. Which, that makes it less believable. That's one of the cliches. And he takes it home, puts it in, and in the end, he destroys it. Like every cliched creepypasta protagonist out there, he destroys it, and he sets it on fire, along with the complete DVD collection of the series, for no reason other than just because. There's no reason for destroying the full set, but he just does it. But then we get to the actual content of the episode. First off, why is Rudy the one that dies? He didn't do anything. He barely said anything to Daisy in the story. Okay, yeah, he said something about Daisy in the beginning, but Daisy wasn't there to hear that. She wouldn't have known that. And when they met her, they were, nice to her. Albert taught them to be nice. And somehow, out of all people, he's the one that gets murdered. And for a stupid reason, too. And not to mention, Albert, sees what he thinks is Rudy smoking a joint. As in a roll of marijuana. A rolled cannabis cigarette. According to Wikipedia. And somehow he deduces that the marijuana is what made him kill his family? Why? Why? It would obviously be for a much bigger reason, Albert. Don't you think? And then we get to the actual motivation as to why people died in this story. Before I get into that, however, what was with the parts where Bill Cosby was, freaking out on camera? That made me not take it seriously. Because don't you think if that was on an episode, that wouldn't have been aired? At all? Don't you think any of this wouldn't have been aired? And the intro. The intro. Oh, Japanese text is spooky, very mysterious. Smiling is the mask of the suffering. I chose Japanese to convey that for some reason. Okay, enough of that. On comes the motivation. Daisy kills people that he knows, that Albert knows, because she can't smile. That's it. She kills people because she's sad. Because she's depressed. Yeah, that's not how depression works. Depression doesn't make you go out and murder people. It's a very serious thing, and this story handled it to the worst extent possible. And author, I sincerely hope that you fully understand the concept of this, because you did not portray it correctly. I'm just going to say that right now. You did not portray it correctly. So, in order to smile again, She cuts off other people's faces and wears them? Which means that she isn't actually smiling? My head hurts! I can't do this, dude. I can't do this anymore. I guess it was coherent enough, but there were some repetitive pieces in there. Let's just get to the rating. 2 out of 10. That was stupid. It handled depression so poorly, so awfully. Author, please improve. This was not a good way to portray the... Yeah, that's long doesn't equal good. Just to clarify. Long doesn't equal good. 2 out of 10. But as always, this is simply my personal opinion. We all have our opinions regarding these pastas. What did you think of the pasta? What would you have done to improve upon it? And as always, I will see you all in the next narration. I love you all. Bless. I need to take some deep breaths. Maybe another drink of my Fago will help me feel better.